Thus, the Ukrainians decided to turn the equation and take advantage of the borders that are not adequately guarded and cross into Russian territory. They crawled into the Russian Kursk region. At this moment, many must have shouted, "What madness is this? The Ukrainians dared to invade a bear!" Perhaps Putin stood in his presidential office in the Kremlin and also shouted, "How dare they do something that was tried before them by those who are much greater and more powerful than them? Ask Hitler, Napoleon, and the Tartars." How could this so-called Zelensky, the former comedian and the weak puppet in the hands of the West and Washington today, dare to invade the Russian bear and penetrate its lands? Yes, perhaps he said this or something similar to it, or perhaps on the contrary, he simply smiled and said, "Welcome to hell. You are where we wanted you to be, for what we have prepared is greater." He may have said this or that, or perhaps he did not say either of them, but what we are sure of is that the invasion of Ukraine, Kursk, at the beginning of the penetration and systematic expansion with the establishment of Ukrainian army points on Russian territory, did not pass unnoticed, and its causes and repercussions on the war will be bigger than many expected. Before delving into the repercussions of the Ukrainian incursion into Russian territory that began on August 6, 2024, and was a surprise not only to Moscow but also to many inside Ukraine, observers and military analysts, my questions must be answered. What happened? How did it happen? How far will the Ukrainians go? How will the Russians respond? And why did Kiev decide to launch this bold attack while its forces are deployed in several places along the 1,000-kilometer front line? After that, you can go on to answer the most important question. Have the seasons of war really turned upside down? Now let's go back a little to August 6. With the start of the surprise attack, there was a scarcity of information. At first, it seemed as if the operation was on the level of the previous intermittent incursions launched by Russian sabotage groups opposed to Vladimir Putin's government. However, only 2 days passed until the attack moved deep into Russian territory, and the violent clashes were about 30 kilometers from the border. The governor of the Kursk region, Budan, did not find it necessary to inform President Putin that 28 Russian villages had fallen into the hands of the Ukrainians. It became clear that the Ukrainian forces, the regular forces, are the ones attacking, and until then, Kiev was silent for unknown reasons, and President Volodymyr Zelensky did not explicitly acknowledge it until August 12th, when he announced that about 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory had fallen under Kiev's control. However, he was content to talk about pushing the war into Russian territory and did not mention clear reasons or goals behind the incursion, which even America did not participate in planning and does not know anything about. However, military and political analysts went on to confirm that nothing is done without Washington's permission, especially if it comes to the matter of a camel, which is invading Russia and penetrating its territory and establishing military points and a military command office, which the Ukrainians know. Finally, as for the answer to the question of why most analysts agree that tactical dispersion may be one of the main goals of this incursion, since Ukraine knows that it cannot take its adventure far into Russian territory because of the incursion, it is that over the past months, Ukraine has faced difficulty in containing Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, where many areas have fallen into Russian hands, and the situation is no less difficult in the north, east, and south of the country. Given Russia's superiority in the number and armament at many points on the 2,100-kilometer front line, the Ukrainian authorities decided to risk creating a hotspot hundreds of miles away, forcing Russian forces to clarify the scope of their deployment in the hope of ending their suffering from limited movement on the ground. To understand the matter more, we can listen to what a Ukrainian army commander said during an interview with The Economist magazines, that this attack was a gamble. "We sent our most combat-ready units to the weakest point on their border. This gamble did not pay off as quickly as we had hoped. The matter is simply that the Russian leaders are not stupid. They are moving forces but not as quickly as we would like. They also realize that we cannot expand the scope of logistical support by a distance of 80 or 100 kilometers. Based on the statement of the Ukrainian army commander, we can refute Russia's response, which struggled to describe the efforts made to repel the Ukrainian incursion as a counter-terrorism operation. Indeed, up to 121,000 people were transferred from the Kursk region, and another 10,000 people were transferred from the Belgrade region. Coinciding with the Russian authorities declaring a federal state of emergency in the region with the provision of individual financial compensation of $115 to the local population. And of course, all these measures were to support what Putin would say. And indeed, he came out to accuse Ukraine of attacking peaceful civilians, and whoever knows Putin knows what his appropriate response will be. He completely evacuated the region of Russians, which confirms that Ukraine faces a real danger of being exposed to a very harsh response, a response that may exceed what happened with the destructive Russian bombing campaign against the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, which led to the destruction of most of it or its partial damage, which means that the response may range from making this campaign more severe and directing pressure with a large advance on other fronts in the east that forces the Ukrainians to return. Or perhaps Putin may call for another wave of mobilization and mobilize hundreds of thousands of additional soldiers to his armed forces, in addition to the darkest scenario that Putin goes as far as using tactical nuclear weapons on a limited scale, while analysts say that it may be a message to those concerned from Putin that invading any inch of Russian territory is a very red line. And he who warns is excused, and according to these analysts, Bebot was waiting for this Ukrainian gamble is to break the current soldiers in the war, rearrange things, strike his blow, and end the matter once and perhaps forever. Until then, we have to watch the developments on the Kursk front and wait.